The lights go up on the Dolby Theatre, Los Angeles, November 2014. The audience is on its feet before she reaches the microphone. She doesn't hurry. She never hurried for anyone. Here is the story. 94 years old, a wheelchair, a red dress. And in her hands, for the first time in a career that spans 76 years and 57 films and 5 collaborations with John Ford and one of the most genuinely charged screen partnerships in the history of American cinema, an Academy Award. If stories like this one stay with you, subscribe now. Every week, a story they never fully told you. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave Maureen O'Hara an honorary Oscar in 2014. The citation spoke of a legendary career, of timeless performances, of an enduring contribution to cinema. The people in the room applauded with the particular warmth reserved for someone very old and very famous who has survived long enough for the industry to finally say the thing it should have said decades earlier. What the citation did not say, what no official statement ever says, because official statements are not designed for this kind of honesty, is what the award actually meant. What 76 years had actually looked like from the inside. What it had cost to maintain the standard she maintained from the first day she walked onto a set in 1938 to the last film she made in 1991. What the industry had done with that standard and what it had refused to do with it and what it had said instead, for decades, when it wanted to acknowledge her existence without acknowledging her craft. It had said, beautiful. It had said, magnificent hair, extraordinary eyes, a presence that the camera loves. It had said these things accurately and repeatedly, and it had meant them, and it had also used them, with the practiced efficiency of a system that knows how to absorb a challenge by reframing it as an ornament, to avoid saying the thing that was actually true. The thing that was actually true was what John Ford said in private conversations in the years before his death, what Winton Hoch said when he talked about building shots around her, what John Wayne said when he described the only co-star who never let him coast, what every director and every cinematographer and every crew member who worked with her closely understood without always having the words for it. She was the most complete professional any of them had ever encountered, the most genuinely present, the most incapable of giving the camera anything other than what was actually true. The industry spent 70 years finding other ways to say this. In 1942, after How Green Was My Valley won 5 Academy Awards including Best Picture and Best Director, the conversation about Maureen O'Hara's contribution to the film centered on her appearance. The green eyes, the red hair. The quality of her skin in the black and white photography of Arthur Miller, who won the cinematography Oscar that year. She was 22 years old. She had held scenes against Donald Crisp and Walter Pidgeon with the assurance of someone who had been doing this for 20 years. The critics praised her beauty. In 1952, after The Quiet Man became one of the most successful films John Ford ever made, the conversation centered on the chemistry between her and John Wayne. The electricity of their scenes together, the on-screen heat of the confrontations, the physical quality of what happened when those two faces occupied the same frame. She was 32 years old. She had given Ford a performance that he described in private as the truest thing he had ever put on film. The critics praised the chemistry. In 1961, after The Parent Trap demonstrated a comic range that surprised critics who had spent 2 decades defining her as a dramatic presence, the conversation centered on how unexpected this was, how different from what they had come to expect. She was 41 years old. She had understood from the beginning that range was not the point. The point was truth, and truth wore different faces in different material. The critics praised the surprise. Year after year, film after film. The praise arrived consistently and genuinely, and always slightly beside the point. Beautiful, magnetic, fiery, authentic. Words that described the surface of what she was doing rather than the thing itself. Words that appreciated the result without naming the source. The source was what Ford named, what Hoch named, what Wayne named, what all of them named when they were being precise rather than public. Complete presence. The refusal to give the camera anything that wasn't actually there. The internal compass that never needed external calibration. The thing you cannot teach and cannot direct into someone, and cannot manufacture with technique or will or any amount of craft deployed in the service of producing its appearance. The thing either exists in a person or it doesn't. In Maureen O'Hara, it existed so completely and so consistently for so long that the people who worked with her most closely stopped thinking of it as something she did and started thinking of it as something she was. The industry spent 70 years describing the effects of this and almost never describing the cause. The Honorary Oscar in 2014 was, officially, a recognition of her contribution to cinema. What it was actually, if you knew the history, was the industry arriving at the end of a very long journey toward a statement it had been circling for 7 decades, and finally, at 94, saying it directly. She was one of the greatest actresses who ever lived, not one of the most beautiful, not one of the most magnetic, not one of the most authentic, one of the greatest, the standard by which the thing itself should be measured. She had known this for 76 years. She had known it without needing the industry to confirm it, because the confirmation that mattered was the one she got from the camera every time the camera rolled, and she was actually there, and the thing the camera found was not a performance, but a fact. She had also known, for 76 years, that the industry was going to take its time getting there. And she had waited. With the particular patience of someone who has never confused their own knowledge of their worth with the industry's acknowledgement of it. Who understands that those two things operate on different timescales and that only one of them is within your control. She had controlled the one within her control. For 76 years, without adjustment, without compromise, without the surplus of what she brought disappearing into material that couldn't hold it, without the quality of her presence being traded for a more convenient version of it, without the internal compass being recalibrated toward what the industry wanted rather than what the work required, she had held the standard, all of it, every day of 76 years. Now she is in a wheelchair in a red dress in the Dolby Theatre, and the audience is on its feet, and she is holding an Oscar, and she has not hurried for any of it. The speech is short. She thanks John Ford, dead for 41 years. She thanks John Wayne, dead for 35 years. She thanks her family. She speaks for less than 3 minutes. The audience is crying before she finishes. What she doesn't say is everything the speech contains. She doesn't say, "I knew." She doesn't say, "I always knew." She doesn't say anything about the studio executives who told her she was difficult, or the critics who praised her hair, or the decades when the industry used the word beautiful as a way of not saying the word great. She doesn't say any of it because she never needed to say it. That is the final and most complete expression of who she has always been. The woman who didn't argue when the industry underestimated her, who didn't perform bitterness when the recognition took longer than it should have, who didn't claim anything loudly or publicly that the work itself was not already claiming silently and continuously in every frame of every film she ever made. She holds the Oscar. She looks at the audience. The audience looks back. 76 years, 57 films, one standard held without exception. The applause goes on for a long time. There is something specific about the night of November 8, 2014 that deserves to be named directly, because the official record of the ceremony doesn't name it, and the reviews written in the days afterward don't name it, and it is the thing that makes the Honorary Oscar something more than a warm gesture from an industry that remembered an old actress fondly. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has given honorary Oscars to many people across its history. Some of them arrived at the right time. The recognition and the career aligned. The honor felt like acknowledgement rather than correction. Others arrived late, the way Maureen O'Hara's did, and the lateness is the whole point. She was not given an honorary Oscar because the Academy suddenly understood something it had not understood before. The Academy understood what she was from the beginning. Every person in that industry who worked with her closely understood it from the beginning. The cinematographers who adjusted the light for her face without being asked. The directors who stopped giving her direction because they understood that direction was interference. The co-stars who arrived at their marks and discovered that the woman opposite them was so completely present that performing beside her was not possible. You either arrived with everything you had, or the gap between what you were doing and what she was doing became visible on screen and stayed visible forever. They all knew. What they did not do, for 76 years, was say it in the language that the industry uses when it has decided something is permanent. The language of awards and citations and formal recognition. The language that converts a career from a collection of individual performances into a statement about what the art form is capable of and what it requires and what it looks like when someone embodies its highest demands for 7 decades without deviation. That language arrived in 2014, on a stage in Los Angeles, in front of an audience on its feet, and she sat in it, in the wheelchair, in the red dress, with the same quality she had brought to every set she ever walked onto. Complete presence. No performance of gratitude or the elaborate emotional display that public recognition usually produces in people who have waited a long time for it. She received it the way she received everything, directly, without adjustment, as a fact about the world that she was simply present for. The audience felt this. That is why the applause went on as long as it did. Not because she was 94 and still alive and still composed, because she was, in that moment, exactly what she had always been, and the audience was seeing it clearly for what might have been the first time. She was still completely there. In the days that follow, one critic publishes a short piece more precise than anything else written about the ceremony. He writes, "The industry gave Maureen O'Hara an honorary Oscar at 94. What the industry actually did was take 76 years to say something the camera had been saying since 1938. Then, the camera was right, it always is. The only question is whether we are paying attention." She reads the piece in her house in Glengarriff. She folds it. She puts it in a drawer. She doesn't mention it to anyone. She doesn't need to. About what it means to know something true about yourself for 76 years, and wait, without anxiety and without bitterness, for the world to catch up. About the difference between recognition and worth. About what happens to a person who understands those two things are not the same, and builds their entire career on the one that is actually within their control. About a red dress and a wheelchair, and an Oscar held in steady hands, and a speech that said everything by leaving out everything that didn't need to be said. About 76 years of one standard, held completely, without exception. That's the Maureen O'Hara who walked onto a stage in 2014 and received from an industry what the camera had known since 1938. She didn't hurry to the microphone. She never hurried for anyone. That's the one worth knowing.